the baby Jesus, whose birth rocked our worlds and our ways of being and brought God's message of love and revolution into a tangible form. In just a few weeks, this manger will be filled, but we're not quite there yet. Last week in the Gospel of Matthew, we found Gabriel, an angel of the Lord, breaking the news of an unexpected pregnancy to Joseph, the earthly father of the coming Christ child. From his example of waiting to respond rather than react to this news, we learned that how we too can keep hope alive in the darkness of our own situations. Today, we are turning to that pregnant young woman herself, Mary, the mother of Jesus. When many people think of her, they picture a calm, smiling woman, Caucasian, maybe in her mid-20s, early 30s, wearing a blue head covering and a clean white robe. The gospel accounts of Mary, though, tell us a very different story about a poor, troubled, pregnant teenager, if not even younger than a teenager. She's torn from her normal Jewish existence and tossed into the chaos of God's plan to bring the gospel into the world as a human. Having to face her betrothed, Joseph, already pregnant, throwing herself to his mercy, how does Mary find the strength to survive? Simply, she seeks comfort in her faith and peace in the community of her family. Today's text begins with the line, when Elizabeth was 6 months pregnant. Now, the first 25 verses of Luke 1 tell the story of a barren woman called Elizabeth who was married to Zechariah, both righteous people. Luke doesn't begin with Jesus, as does the Gospel of Matthew, but Luke starts with his relative, a parallel story of pregnancy. In biblical times, barrenness, the lack of children in a marriage, was thought to be a woman's disease, a woman's curse, a woman's problem. These were the days before scientists taught us how the biology of conception works, and that men too can be unable to conceive. In biblical times, barren women were in a very dangerous position. If they could not bear sons, then they could never receive the wealth of their husbands should their husbands pass away. Women were not allowed to own property. Women were not allowed to work for their own keep. If their husbands died and they had no sons and daughters, then they were left to fend for themselves and throw themselves on the mercy of their community. Women were more like possessions back then than humans. And it's funny that the Gospel of Luke begins with two women's stories. Luke gives such voice and room to the stories of people who in that times weren't really even considered equal as people. Perhaps it's because Luke is thought to have been a physician. If that's so, then he probably attended the births of many people and saw the strength and the power of women, the humanity and the importance of them. We can't be sure. He doesn't state his reasons for why he laid out his gospel in this way, but in the first chapter of Luke's account, he does allow women to speak for themselves. This is quite uncommon in the Bible. Even in the Old Testament, where you find many stories of women, they're often told by men or by commentators or narrators who add their own 2 cents to each woman's story. Here in Luke 1, we hear the voice of Mary as she responds to the visit by the angel Gabriel. Later in verses 46 to 55, we hear Mary's voice again, clearly and directly in the Magnificat, the song or prayer of praise that she sings to her Lord. So, what does Mary say? She has an awesome opportunity here to speak for herself. When Gabriel tells her that she is favored and has been chosen to give birth to the Son of God, he says she should be honored. Apparently, though, her first reactions were confusion and fear. I mean, who wouldn't be surprised if they were visited by an angel man? For some of us, our first reaction may be to consider adjusting our meds. But in all seriousness, I love Luke's account of the natural reaction of this poor young woman to the startling visitor and this shocking news. Mary is strong and she's smart. She doesn't tell Gabriel to take a hike, and she doesn't simply accept his proclamation without any questions. She wants to find out a little bit more information first, and her first recorded words in the gospel are a question. How will this happen, since I haven't had sexual relations with a man? I mean, she is obviously adjusting to the initial shock of seeing this angel, and she's heard an account of what is to be in her life, the next few stages of her future laid out. But she's not quite sure that he has his story straight. If she's going to consider this, she'd like to know some more details, please. And so he explains the details, and he mentions the miraculous pregnancy of her older relative, Elizabeth. When she hears this, Mary seems to accept that nothing is impossible through God. I wonder, did she sigh? Did she pause for a few minutes to consider her answer? Does it cross her mind to run, or simply to pinch herself awake from this crazy dream? We don't know. But what we do know is that her next words solidify Mary's faith and speak volumes about her devotion to God and her religious faith, even at her young age, even in unbelievable times and circumstances. She says, I am the Lord's servant. Let it be with me, just as you have said. Powerful words from a previously powerless and now very empowered young woman. Let it be with me, just as God has said. Have you ever uttered those words? Let it be. Let it be. John Lennon tells us there will be an answer. Let it be. Well, Mary's answer was brief, but her few words were very profound. They said all that needs to be said. She is not in control of her life. I am the Lord's servant. And she invites the Spirit to work in her. Let it be with me, just as you have said. Mary is brave, but she's no fool. She knows that things are about to get really tough for her. In the next verse, right away, verse 39, she gets up and hurries to a nearby city to visit her relative Elizabeth. Elizabeth would have been more like an older aunt or a grandmother to Mary than a peer. But haven't pregnant, single, young women always run away, stolen away to safe places where other women or older women could take care of them, could nurture them? Mary must still be in shock, and I'm sure she'd kind of like to see for her own eyes if Gabriel is legit. She's headed to the heart of his story to check up on his facts. Is her relative, in fact, actually pregnant? Maybe Mary holds a glimmer of hope as she runs. Maybe this is all a mistake. Maybe it was a fantasy or a dream, and she'll get there. Elizabeth will not be pregnant, and Mary will know that this was all just fantasy. She could rest a lot easier knowing. At 6 months pregnant, Elizabeth's belly must have been obviously swollen. And as soon as Mary catches a glimpse of her relative, this older woman, she must know the truth in the pit of her stomach, that deep place of knowing where we know things before we recognize them with our hearts or with our minds. When Mary sees Elizabeth, she can no longer hope that this may be a mistake. She must have known that it was and it would all be as Gabriel had said. and that realization must have struck her fiercely. I picture her gasping, perhaps even falling to her knees. Oh my, what joy and excitement she must have felt for Elizabeth to have finally been able to conceive a child in her barren state. But what fear and joy she must have felt for herself to see that swollen belly and to know that in just a few short months she would share that fate, and her belly would be swollen with the Son of God. I speak from recent experience when I say that around the 6th month of pregnancy, babies start to move around a lot. With Lillian, I expected a few soft movements, but the force of her kicks and flips surprised me and took my breath away. Elizabeth must have felt that too. The baby John leapt inside her when she saw Mary. This is the John who would become John the Baptist, calling out in the wilderness that Jesus was coming to begin his ministry on the earth. Luke says that when John leapt, Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. Now, for me, that felt less like a spirit dance and more like kickboxing, but the Spirit moves in mysterious ways. The point is, these two women have a deep and physical connection, a physical reaction to one another. Both are perhaps scared in their situations, wondering what will come next and how they will survive. But being together gives them the strength to carry on. The second Sunday in Advent is focused on peace, as you have heard this morning. Just as Mary found peace in the arms of a wise and older relative, so many of us have found peace at the dinner tables or working in the yards and homes of our friends and neighbors as we seek to recover from the darkness of our own unexpected chaos and disaster. Today's story makes it clear. Angels are still among us, bringing us surprising and sometimes wonderful news. And in chaos, when we don't know where to go or where to turn, we cannot withdraw into the darkness and attempt to go it alone. We must run to the nearest village, find the nearest friend or relative or neighbor, and seek comfort and peace in the loving arms of community. Today, some of you have chosen to join this community, and for that we are deeply grateful. May we all encompass them and all the others in our daily lives with love and concern, prayer and fellowship. Fellowship. That was palpable last night at the chili supper. And may it continue to be so throughout this busy season. May we wait and watch together for the tiny baby who is certainly coming our way. Amen.